But basically this is a brown bag on how to make an iOS app with Swift, so from the ground up with no code. It's going to be quite technical, so I guess the purpose of this talk is for you to understand what's involved in making an app. And so instead of asking how do I make an iOS app, at the end of this you should be saying how can I fix the layout. So you'll be able to ask a lot more specific questions on what's involved. So what I'm going to make today is a little app that connects to Instagram. And first bit. Yep. And just loads in some images. So by the end of this brown bag, we'll be able to make an app that's fully functioning like that.
What is on the top there?
That's you, Marcus. Okay, so what's involved with getting or developing an iOS app? Well, first there's a free tool from Apple, and it's called Xcode. You can get it from the App Store, and you can just download it as a DMG and just install it on your computer. So it's free, and it's basically an IDE where you've got UI elements that you can drag on. You can write your code, you can test the code. It's pretty much all you need to write an iOS app, so it's pretty much the only tool. So if you want to read up on what Xcode is, just a page on Apple, but yeah, probably best just to get downloading. Now previously writing iOS apps we'd use a language called Objective-C, and then Objective-C 2 came out. That's pretty much C, but it's got objects, and objects send each other messages and whatnot, and they might respond, they might not respond. That's the technology that we won't be using today. We'll be using a new programming language called Swift. And Swift came out a few months ago from Apple, and it's pretty much the future of iOS development. So if you're looking at starting iOS dev, now's pretty much a great time to start. Sure, you'll come across Objective-C code, but it's probably best to start learning the Swift code because Apple doesn't tend to really roll back their decisions, so Swift seems like the way forward. So you can get a free book from Apple, which pretty much takes you from no knowledge at all to right through to understanding Swift all the way through. So that's for free. It's just on EPUB. You can get it from iBooks. So check that out. So to show you a quick little demo on how to use Swift, we've got Xcode here, and there's a tool called Playgrounds. And that's for testing out and playing around with Swift and I guess prototyping code. It's good for benchmarking code, testing the performance of it and whatnot. So this is a playground here. We can create a variable and see the contents of the variable there. Sorry, totally in my own world. Is that better? Everyone see back there?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see the contents of the variable there, and you can start playing around with a bit more of the language itself. So you've got, and you can go print I, and on the right hand side you can see how many times that sort of executed that line, but you can also inspect what the output was on each line. And you can do similar things with like graphical elements, see how they're represented on screen. If you're doing sort of benchmarking, you can see the time taken even through, or the value as it increases as a graph. So it's a really handy tool of testing out and learning the language. But we're going to get started in making our app. So open up Xcode, and I'm going to create a new project. So there's some different sort of templates that you can use in creating a project. A lot of them just create some scripts for you and some graphical elements, but most of the time you just delete them and start from scratch. So we're going to go with one that creates the least amount of boilerplate code here, and that's single view application. We'll call it Dog Viewer 3000. We're going to choose Swift as the language. Drop down is Objective-C. You can actually use both, but we're not going to complicate this thing, so we're just going to stick with Swift. Devices, if you select universal, that means one bit of code can be deployed on an iPad and an iPhone, and we'll do that today. I'm hoping when the iWatch or the Apple Watch comes out, then that might actually be a part of universal. It might be crazy if it is, but we'll see.
Is the idea that if you just choose phones, for instance, then some of the language is restricted? You can't use some features that are that specific?
Features, yeah. Part of the SDK will be locked down.
Yep.
Yeah. So it can also create a little Git repository for you, and we'll do that. So what do we have here? We have, I can't really blow that up too well, but it's created some files here for us. It's got a launch screen, storyboard, view controller. We'll keep everything apart from app delegate. So we'll delete those and we'll create them down the track. And blow that up. So what is app delegate and why did I keep it around? Well, you're not really in charge as an app developer of starting the application and handling it when it starts up. So there's no really init scripts that you need to run. Instead, you've got a delegate sort of pattern. So once the app's launched, it starts sending notifications to its delegate. It lets us know that, yeah, it's started up, or it's about to go to the background, or it's gone to the background. So different hooks that you can come into. You pretty much need that because it tells the application that once it's launched, it's ready to get going. So we need this file. But from there, we won't really pay much more attention to it. So we want to create some graphical elements. Remember, we got that list that we wanted to show, so we'll start building that. And we use a tool called storyboards here. So if we create a new storyboard, call it main. If we run that up now, we can see what we're sort of working with. And it's a nice little black screen. So we got a lot of work to do. What we need to do is create an entry point to our app. And iOS development is very MVC. It is MVC. So you got the model where your data is pretty much stored and where it's maintained. You've got your view controllers or your controllers, and that sort of marshals data in and out. And then you've got your views, and the views are in charge of presenting the data in its own sort of way. So we've created a view controller here, and that's the middle point. This is talking to our data sources and handing off to the views. So you'll see that we're actually going to manipulate the views here, and with that we can connect our views to our controller, and that's down the track. So we're just going to drop some elements on screen now. So we needed a list of dog images, and we use a table view for that. So selecting from the bottom right here, you can see a lot of different elements. You can see we've got labels, a label type there, so that's just an object you can drop on. We've got buttons, we've got activity indicators, so little progress spinners you can drop on, and they're all view elements that you can just drag on and start communicating with and manipulating. A lot of them, and a very common trend, is to drop a base native object on and then subclass that, so you're customizing it right from the get-go. Drag an object and then you can start extending upon it, and that's what we'll do. So we've got a table view, and we also need custom cells. So we'll drag this in. We'll set a height to the cell, and so each cell dog image is going to be 320 pixels high. And back on our design image, we knew that we had an image of a dog, so we'll drag on an image. It had a caption, so we'll drag on a caption, a UI label. Won't go too into depth with the design of it, we'll get to that at the end. And we also had a little background graphic that made the text a bit easier to read. So we'll just drag them on and dump them on screen. Select the color of that. Now if we run up the app, we should still see a black screen. We haven't actually told the app what's the initial view controller to load. And there's a little checkbox there. If you select the view controller, say this initial view controller, then what we should see now is a list of 320 pixel high. cells, but there's not actually that black view that was on screen. What that means is this cell here represents a template of a cell, so we don't need to create every little view for each cell because it could go on for millions of dog cells. So we've just made a template here, but we haven't actually told the table view to start loading in cells and display them. And for that we need to write some code. We need to firstly grab the JSON and then start pushing it out to the table. So to do that we'll create a new view controller file, and it's a Cocoa Touch class. Cocoa is the framework for where all the UI elements come from. It's pretty much the SDK for iOS, and it's going to be a UI view controller type. So we're going to get into some code now, but if it goes over your head, yeah, it probably will. But the general principle of it is going to be there. So if you've got any questions about the syntax or whatnot, just feel free to come up after. So we'll call this dog view controller. The language is Swift. Create that file, just put it into the project, and it's created some boilerplate code for us. You can see it's got did receive memory warning there. That basically gets fired with the app delegate. The app tells the app delegate, look, I'm running out of memory, and from there this method gets called on all the view controllers saying, look, you're about to run out of memory. So the view controller is then in charge of cleaning up memory, deleting objects, freeing up memory, otherwise you're going to crash. But we don't really care about crashing for this small app, so we're going to remove it.
Just for this app. Is that more standard?
Yeah. Yeah, I've never crashed. So we know we need to grab some results and we need to put them somewhere. So we're going to create an array called results, and it's going to be of a type of array, so you can type that, and inside that array, for now, we're just going to have it as called any object. That question mark means the results can be nil or it can contain a value. Some properties aren't optional in the sense that they always have to have a value. If they ever turn nil, the app will crash. This is a new sort of ruling on Swift. Previously, any objects in Objective-C could be nil. If you send them an object, they'll just ignore it. But with Swift, it will crash the app instantaneously. And there's no try catches in Swift. So it sort of enforces a very... the developer has to have their brain turned on pretty much, because if anything is nil, it's just going to crash the app instant, and there's no way to recover. So we're going to default with initializer of an empty array there. And in order for us to use a table view, we're going to introduce table view data source. This is a protocol, so this means that our view controller must adhere to some certain methods that the table view expects. So two of those are that the table view expects to be told how many numbers of cells need to appear, and that could be the count of results. And the table view also is going to ask our view controller, what sort of cell are you going to give me? So are you going to give me a pizza cell, a dog cell, or a cat cell? It's going to ask this view controller for a cell, and it's going to ask for how many numbers of cells. So we need it. You can see instantaneously I've put in that protocol, and it's given me a warning saying it doesn't conform. So we need to implement those two methods now, and that is number of rows in section. So I'm going to return how many rows the table view should have, and that would be how many objects are in the results count. And for whatever reason, if results is nil, we're going to return 0. Double question mark is almost like an Elvis operator in the sense that if the left-hand side is only nil, it will go to the right-hand side.
That's better than Elvis operator.
Yeah, I still can't decide what to call it. And also table view self row at index path, and this is where we're going to return a cell. And I'm going to skip over something here, but I'm implementing table view DQ cell with identifier. This is some smarts that I'll get into towards the end when I show you a problem, and then return the cell. So failed. I need to type it as UI table view cell. And what I'm expecting, still an empty table view. So I haven't actually got results down yet and whatnot. But I need to customize my table view cell, so the actual representation. I need to write some code in order to hook that up. And what I really should do is hook up the table view. But let's create the file now anyway. And this is going to be a UI table view cell class, and we'll call it dog table view cell. It's still Swift.
You can't unless you're in the virtual meeting. Sorry, God.
Rejected, too late. So this just creates some boilerplate code as well. We don't need any of that. So we created a new cell, which means we can now type it. Determined. So we've typed it there. So let's hook up our table view. So in order to do that, we need to create an outlet on our view controller. And I'm about to introduce a new concept of the exclamation mark, which means you're guaranteed that that is going to have a value no matter what. So this will never go nil, and if it does, your app's going to crash. But this is telling the runtime compiler that this value will definitely have, or this variable will definitely have a value. So now that I've created an outlet in my code, I can now link up the table view. To there. But I haven't actually told this view controller on the storyboard of what class it is. And as soon as you do that, then all your outlets become available. So dog view controller, type that, go back to my table view, and now I start joining my table view, connecting it to that property that I just made for table view. So what that allows me to do now is target that table view in code, which we'll get to. But let's do the same for the table view cell, so the caption and the image that we need to hook up. So in order to do that, create a new outlet and call it caption label. Label, that's good, and it's got a type of UI label. And we expect it to be there, so we'll put in exclamation mark, make another outlet to connect our dog image view, and it's going to be there. So we go back to our storyboard, go to our label. Again, we need to type the cell before those outlets come available.
There's a syntax error, you have to go back there.
No, I don't. With Swift, it can be, the errors are really bad. I mean, it's still new, so the errors that you see on screen may not appear to be there.
But
So you just
instead of a T, you put an R. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so what I can do, I'll connect this up and then we'll see the kind of error, the red herring that it gives. Thank you, syntax parser. So, got my image view, and let's link that up. Oh, Marcus, you're going to make an ass of me. Alright. Dog image view. So that's our image view, and now our label is caption label. There you go, Chris. Sorry, that is very, yeah, that's ridiculous. So those are connected, but we haven't actually got data. So if we fire up the app now, what we're expecting to see is just the empty table view. So let's go get some data from Instagram. I've read the API previously, and this is the output that we're expecting. So this is searching for...
If you change the resolution, doesn't it get better?
So we're searching for the dogs hashtag here. So tags dogs, and you can see the output that Instagram's given us. So it's got an array of data that we're expecting. So data is an array. It's got comments, it's got images at different resolutions, it's got a caption, so with text in there, and we're going to use the caption and we're going to use the standard resolution. So in order to grab some JSON out, we're going to use a tool called Alamofire. Alamofire is a framework that allows us to quickly do gets, posts, puts. It does JSON serialization, XML, whatever. It just makes the whole job a lot more enjoyable and a lot more, I guess, managed for us. I'll skip the installation steps. It is a bit of a nightmare. So if this demo is going to fail, it's going to fail at this point. We're also going to use another tool for unraveling the JSON into actual objects and not just a dictionary, which is a nightmare in Swift. It's called SwiftyJSON, and the last library that I'm just about to import is called Haneke. That's a nice little tool with image views, looking out to the real world, grabbing from a URL and bringing in an image and loading it with a lot of caching smarts around it. So they're all pretty cool tools to use, and so I'll just go about quickly importing them now. And Alamofire. So please work. So I should just be able to drag that. So that worked. Haneke, that worked. And SwiftyJSON isn't too friendly as a framework, so we're just going to grab the nuts and bolts, put it into the project, and so now we have access to those frameworks. Alamofire and Haneke. Import them. We should still be able to run up the project. And we're getting close to getting our dog images on screen. So to do that, let's import Alamofire, which is our networking tool. And we're going to create a new method here called loadDogs. This is back in our dog view controller, that big parent thing. This view controller here that contains everything, including the table view. And we're going to define a new method, func load dogs. So in here we'll do our request, alamofire.request. The method is get. The URL we don't have yet, but I'm just going to type URL there, and let's ignore that. So we need our access token because it has to get authenticated with Instagram. Spell access token. I've got an access token here that I generated before. We don't really want to get into that. I've defined a constant up here, so that allows me to use it without getting modified. And let defines it as a constant, and var means a variable data type. So I should have mentioned that before. So then I define my URL. So let's make that a constant. URL equals the endpoint that we want to hit is here. And we're going to put in our access token there. So that's our URL defined. And so that means Alamofire is going to send off a request and grab the data down, but it hasn't actually told the response type. Response type is JSON. This is a closure where once complete, it will come back with an error or a JSON object. Error. Okay, so what we should see now, if I print that out, is a whole lot of log garbage in console. Hopefully, if my network's going to work. There we go. So it's gone off to Instagram there, and you can see the same sort of data that we're expecting. Okay, so let's go about putting that into the results array, which will then tell our table view to load up the results and the images. Well, not quite the images just yet, but at least get some results going. So we'll check first if JSON, because you need to do a lot of checking with Swift, make sure it's not nil object. Then we actually want to deserialize JSON. Yep, let's go about turning this JSON, which is basically a dictionary, into JSON objects, and we use SwiftyJSON for that. So we'll go var JSON object, and this parses out the JSON. We put a bang there because this JSON method doesn't expect a nil, so we need to give it some guarantee that we won't get some compiler warnings, that it's definitely going to be there. We expect it to be there. Now we're going to do if let data. So we're about to grab out this. We're about to grab out this array here, which is an array of all our photos. Yep. So if data JSON object data, and we need to tell it what's coming out of it is an array. Let's typecast it as an array of JSON objects, and that question mark signifies that we're typing it as optional. So data may be nil, or it may be a JSON object or an array of JSON objects. So once we're in here, what we will be doing is setting self.results equals data, and then we're going to tell the table view to reload itself. JSON, okay. So what this compiler, this is actually a decent warning, telling me that I've typed previously my results to be any object, but it's actually got a JSON object. So any object, if I'm being specifically typed, I can't type it to any object. So it needs to match. Run that up, and still blank. Okay. So now with that said, we're going to go and start filling in the data into the cells. Actually, might just wait a little bit because the network took a while. In theory, this should scroll down to be 20 or so cells. You think? We'll test later.
There's a lot of dogs on the internet.
Yeah, there are a lot. There are.
Try cats.
So we've got our results, hopefully, and they've come down. We need to set that each little array item towards our cell. So if we go cell.dog, we haven't actually created this property of dog yet. If we grab that out of our results, and we're at index path of row, index path dot row, so that signifies that the table view is saying, look, I'm at index number 3, I want my third row. Grab that out of the result set, store it against the dog cell, and from then on, with MVC pattern, the view should be then in charge of showing that data on screen. So showing the image, placing the image, changing the caption and whatnot. So we're getting error out of there because the dog property doesn't exist. So let's create it. Dog, it's a type of JSON now, optional, and we're going to have a custom setter here. So after it did set the property, let's go fire off a method. So set up dog. Doesn't exist yet, so func set up dog. There. So this is the part where we've got a JSON object and we need to get out the caption and the URL to load the image. So we can do that. We're going to populate the caption label first, and we're going to set the text of the caption label. So if we go self.dog, that property that we just created, I unfortunately remember the structure of Instagram's JSON off by heart, and we'll grab the string from that. Text can accept a nil, so we don't need to put it to a bang there. Let's also grab out the image. So Instagram API doesn't send down an image object, it sends down a URL. So first we need to test if that URL is okay. If it is, then we're going to go about and load that URL into the image view. So we can go, let's test it first. So if let equals URL, let's call it URL string, self.dog, and it is images. Might actually just go back to the JSON. So we've got images, standard resolution, and URL that we need to grab out. So if that's there, then we can go about creating a URL object. And we may as well do that. Let URL. And we're going to create an NS URL, which is pretty much a smart object that does a lot of things for us with URLs, like it will split the paths, check the extension for us, get the protocol out, and it makes things a lot easier. So we'll define that. Now once that's done, we'll import our Haneke library, which is the image sort of handling library that we imported at the beginning. And we're going to tell the dog image view to start loading that image using Haneke's set image from URL. It's got some other properties there where you can have a placeholder first, so instantaneously it will put down an image that you specify, and once it fetches the other image from the internet, then it will just replace it out. But we don't have a placeholder. We're just going to use the URL.
Is that all happening in sequence?
It is. So, yeah. doesn't expect an optional type, URL string, and it cannot be null. JSON. It wants a string value because it's still a JSON object. Getting an error does not have it's an optional. So we have defined results to be an optional, so that means it can be nil. So if we didn't have this here, it's giving us a warning because it's saying, look, you define this as optional. You first have to tell me that you can actually access it as an optional. So that succeeded. And we should be getting some results back.
Is your array value as JSON as to be question mark, right?
Mm-hmm. It's hitting the breakpoint. Table view is being told to load. And so this is me just debugging, seeing what's going wrong here. Once the table view is told to reload, it should then go about hitting how many rows do I need to load and what sort of cells do I need to load. So let's see, it's told to reload, but the results haven't actually come down. So let's print out the contents of data. Typical. Yep, you can expect Xcode to crash now and then with Swift. Right.
Array value as question mark.
It shouldn't be.
Okay.
It's actually got data. I saw the array of 20 there. So it's told to reload. Let's just double check that I've hooked up the table view.
Data source.
Bam. Yeah. Okay, so I've hooked up the table view in a way that the view controller code can tell the table view to do some stuff. It's got a reference there. But the table view itself hasn't been told where to load the data from. So that's the missing piece of the puzzle there. It didn't crash because self.tableview exists. We've told it that much. But it didn't load the data because we haven't told the table view where to get the data from. So to do that, click on the table view, and there's two things here. One's called data source and one's called delegate. We won't go use the delegate today, but we'll link up the data source. And now we should see some happy dogs. Got a crash. And that is because of this little bit here, DQ reusable cell with identifier. This is some smarts built in with iOS in that it recycles cells. So if you had 20 million dogs in this array, it wouldn't go about creating 20 million different objects. Instead, what you'd see on screen is these two cells there on screen. They're both in memory. As soon as you start scrolling up through the list, it will try and grab out one from the recycling bin. One that's just been gone off screen perhaps, and that object's been recycled. It doesn't create a new one from scratch. So that's what we need to do. We need to give it an identifier to tell the table view which one to go to the recycling bin with. If we go back to our storyboard and we go to the template cell that we had, there's a little panel over here with reuse identifier. We call it dog cell and we restart the project. Another crash. Well, that's a big one. Alright, it's crashing because it doesn't really know the constraints of the image view, because that's the size of it. This little dot there. For some reason, storyboards put it as that size. Let's go about doing some UI work now, and this is called auto layout. And auto layout is a bit of a beast. It's like CSS but for iOS. You just basically add constraints. You can set maximum attributes, minimum attributes. Elements can equal the same size or be percentages of different elements. And so what we're going to do is blow up the image view of the dog to equal the entire cell. So we've just told it to anchor to each of the four corners or the four sides of the cell. And hopefully Haneke won't freak out. So we've got labels, we've got some images, and we've got some weird white bit down the bottom here. But it's actually working. So our data source is working, and it's actually gone to Instagram. So that's one step. So we'll do a lot more UI tweaking now. I'll show you a little bit of auto layout and how to make this look somewhat okay to go to the App Store. So first bit was the table view. We got this white bar down the bottom, and that's because we're working in a square at the moment. So that square hasn't been told to expand to the actual device size. So if I go like this, rotate it, for some reason it's just locked to the top left and it's got a white bit there. So let's tell the table view to expand to its super view. We don't want to go to margins, but we want to tell it to go all the way. And then reload. And you can see already that it's right down the bottom. Okay. Next bit is we want to get this label somewhat anchoring to the top just to meet the requirements of the designer. So we'll tell the label with auto layout to go to the top, and we'll anchor it to the left, and we want to also anchor it to the right, and that means it's going to go join onto the left and to the right and to the top. We won't give it a height because we want its height to automatically grow. Add constraints, and then we update frames. I'm just doing this sequentially. You can go to a parent view and tell it to update all the frames. That might just make you get lost in actually all the little changes that you've made. So in order to get this to be multiple lines of text, we have to actually counterintuitively set it to 0. This means that there's no constraints on the number of lines and it will just keep growing and growing. Well, also, since we didn't set a height, we'll say that it should have a content hugging property, priority, whatever that means. That just means auto layout has different priorities of working with things. So if you set this height needs to be 30 for this element, and this height also needs to be equal to its parent view, then you need to tell priorities because you've got conflicting priorities. So you need to tell which one gives precedence over another. Content hugging here will give it precedence over any neighboring constraints, so it will start to grow in height. Let's set the text to equal white. And the next step is this view here, which is also apparently this little box. We want it to match the height. So it's just a background for the label. We will set it to anchor to the top, anchor to the left, anchor to the right, and we'll also set a minimum height. So if we just by setting a height and using a combination of priorities, we can give it a min height, set it to 30, ignore that, but we'll tell it to match the height of the label. So by control dragging from that view over to the label, we can say equal the heights. That happens, and then we should be able to update the frame, and then on runtime it should match the label's height. So run it up again, and it hasn't. But yeah. So I haven't actually told it the priority of what to do. So I gave the label 2 things to do. I told it to be the background to be height of 30, and also equal height to the label. But I gave it conflicting priorities. I'll make the min height a lower priority than actually matching the height. And hopefully, there we go. So that's the app, but you're noticing as I scroll down that you might see some images from previous. So that's recycling in action. So go again. This dog here, adorable. Try and look out for that as I scroll down. What is going on there? That's just the cell object getting reloaded. We haven't told it to clear its contents at all. If we want to fix that, we'll go back to our table cell code, and there's a bit of code that happens just before it's about to get a new life, just about till it's about to go on screen, and that's called prepare for reuse. So what we want to do is just clear out the image. We want to make it a white image. So we're just going to set the image to be of the dog image view, and .image to equal nothing. And load it up. They're all white. And that's, yeah, okay. That's pretty much the app, but what we have is a pretty ugly little square there, and we want to give it a custom icon. So to do so, we use a thing called Assets Catalog. This is a little nifty tool where it lays out all the different sizes of app icons, of launch images, launch screens that you want to have. It can be used for all image assets in your application, as well as where you want to slice the image if perhaps it doesn't fit a particular button, or yeah, it's a really powerful tool. We just need one image for this, and that's 2x. That means it's Retina. At 3x is for the new iPhone 6 Plus, which is at 3 times image size. So we just want to grab an icon for our awesome application. And I've got one here. Has to be a PNG at the exact size. Just drag it over. And I've ruined the surprise already, but you just saw it happen. There it is. It's a happy little dog. So where to from here? I guess you're really ecstatic about making this app and you want to ship it off to the App Store. So what do you need to do? You have to pay some money. So that's pretty much yeah, the trend of Apple. It's an iOS developer account, and you go here, and it costs $100 a year. But what you get with that is you get all the distribution covered for you. It gets the marketing of the application in the App Store. It also gives the privilege of going through a very horrendous app review process. So that's a bonus. But yeah, it's $99, and hopefully you can recover your funds based on the awesome apps that you make. So that's iOS development in a nutshell. Going forward, if you've got any app ideas yourself, or if you're working on them at home, I'm happy to do continuous brown bags on particular topics. Since you've got a nice overview here, maybe you want to drill down into maybe auto layout, or the networking, or how to structure the code in an app, or how to refactor the code. I'm happy, yeah, happy to take another one. But also next week, Janeth is going to take a brown bag on how to make the Android equivalent, and probably for cats. So we've got 15 minutes spare if you've got any questions. Alright, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.